Good evening and welcome to Town Meeting Television's continuing coverage of Primary 2020. The Vermont primary is coming up on August 11th. I believe that is the date. And hopefully you have gotten your ballots and hopefully you are considering your candidates. Tonight we are speaking with two of the three candidates for the Democratic primary for Chittenden 8-2, which is primarily Essex Junction. Am I correct?
That's right, yes, except for a small little part.
Of Essex.
Yes.
Or yes, that's right.
Small little part of Essex Junction. Yeah.
And 881, right, District 81 is Essex with that small little part of Essex Junction. So tonight we have Karen Dolan and Patrick Murray. Lori Houghton, who is an incumbent for this House seat, is not with us today because she could not make the Zoom connection, but we will hopefully get her comments next week. And we're going to start by giving our candidates a couple minutes to talk about why they're running and what qualifies them for the position. There are two seats in this primary race. And Patrick, we're going to start with you, if you don't mind. Do you prefer to be called Pat or Patrick?
It's Patrick on the ballot, but the only person who actually calls me Patrick is my mother. I think everyone else in the world knows me as Pat. So
all right, very good.
Let's stick with that.
Let's stick with that. Why don't we go with your opening statements, why you're running and what qualifies you for the position. Pat Murray.
Sure, great. Thanks for having us both today. I'm running simply because I love Essex. I love the town that we live in. I know this community, the businesses, the people who live here. I see them day to day. And as the vice chair of the Essex Select Board, I've worked for the last 2 years to make this community a better place. I first moved here to Essex Junction about 11 years ago, and we chose this community specifically for the educational opportunities that it was going to afford our daughter, my wife at the time, and I. But little did I know coming into it that it would be such a vibrant place to live. And I think that that's really one of the most exciting things about living in really what I consider to be the best community in Vermont is that the neighborhood I live in is incredibly diverse. We have an amazing new American population. We have wonderful people who live here, who've come here from all over the world. So a few years ago, I was appointed to the Prudential Committee, which is the K through 8 school board here in Essex Junction. And then after that, I ran for a seat on the Essex Westford School District and completed a 3-year term there before serving on the Essex Select Board. It was the love of the community that brought me into municipal and public service, and it's still that which drives me today. I will say that at the beginning of this, my need to serve the community was rather different than where we find ourselves today. The COVID crisis has put everything into a much sort of sharper focus. And I see that right now there's a desperate need, not just to be part of the community, but to really help those who are in crisis. And I think that I have the ability to come in and be able to help not just locally, but in the legislature as well.
Thank you so much, Pat. Karen Dolan, tell us why you're running and what qualifies you for the position.
Yes. Well, thank you for this opportunity to connect with voters. I'm running for state rep in Essex Junction because I believe in the values of collaboration, curiosity, and connection in order to create progress for our community. We have tremendous work ahead of us, and we need leadership that understands the importance of listening, finding common ground, and lifting each other up. So a bit about me. I grew up in the Northeast Kingdom. After high school, I attended the University of Vermont, where I was the first in my family to graduate from college. Since then, I've spent the past 20 years leading initiatives and implementing programs throughout Chittenden County nonprofits. In this work, I've learned about Vermont's food security systems, work readiness resources, gender equity programs, as well as criminal and restorative justice. I currently work at the Essex Community Justice Center, where I've been for the past 5 years. My career path at first glance may look a bit scattered, but it's actually an important visual of me living out my values, specifically my values of collaboration, curiosity, and connection. Nonprofit work has focused my efforts on connecting community members to make sure folks have the information, resources, and skills needed to succeed. My career path provided the opportunity to see how all of our public service systems are interconnected. Working in community nutrition programs, I saw how poverty and oppression directly affect a person's ability to put nutritious food on the table. I quickly learned the importance of advocating for systemic change while also connecting with folks individually. Learning more about systems required jumping into new career fields and conversations, and doing so without the traditional resume of experience has provided me with the ability to quickly build rapport and embrace the momentum of coalitions. I understand the need for curiosity and for continuous learning. These are the same values and experience I will carry to the State House if elected. I have a track record of bringing stakeholders together to listen to each other, find common ground, and ultimately improve outcomes. This is what leads to sustainable change. And Essex Junction has been my home for the past 14 years, and my family truly appreciates all that the village has provided. So I look forward to this opportunity.
Thank you so much. So what will be different, Karen, because you are in the legislature next year at this time?
Yeah, so with that question, I think it's important to say, I'm not one to assume where folks are at, especially folks all throughout the community. So I won't specifically guarantee that things will be different, but I can guarantee that folks will, or I can commit to ensuring certain experiences voters will have if I'm elected. And one is people will have many opportunities to be heard. In the coming legislative cycle, we'll have many difficult conversations, and a variety of voices and perspectives are needed to ensure that we're making the decisions that best meet everyone's needs. So my goal will to build on the current opportunities that our legislators already have in place to be heard and see what else is needed. I want to make sure that as many folks as possible is heard during these times. Another thing I can commit to is that community members will know that their essential needs are being prioritized in every decision that's being made. This is essential during this time of COVID and uncertainty. Folks need to know that their healthcare, education, employment, childcare, and affordable housing and food security, those needs are all being met. And folks will have a reliable source of information. In addition to seeking input from folks, I want to be seen as a trusted source of information and a reliable pathway between state government and our local community. And lastly, our state will really be poised for a vibrant future. I'm invested in our state. I've lived here my whole life. I have 2 young children that hopefully will live here for most, if not their whole lives. And I'm committed to making sure Vermont is in good hands for them and for all other Vermonters as well.
Thank you so much, Karen Dolan. Pat Murray, what would be different because you ran for the legislature next year at this time and won, presumably?
Well, thank you. I want to be maybe a little bit more specific because I think there are a few things that are coming down the pipeline that I have a little bit more maybe experience or knowledge about that I'd like to just talk about. I think the first is that there is currently a weighting study that's in place around education and educational taxes. If that weighting study is implemented, would represent a massive tax shift for the population of Essex Junction. Is something that would increase our educational taxes, at least somewhere on the order of almost 25 to 30% what we're paying now. It's something that I feel is certainly overdue within the legislature. It has to do with weighting appropriately the rural parts of our community with those children who are being educated in more urban parts as well. But I also think that there are some serious flaws with it, and to implement it as quickly as I think the current legislature has been trying to do, something that was halted with the impact of COVID. I think my voice in the legislature regarding this, especially with the 5 years of experience I've had on school boards before, is something that Essex Junction and the taxpayers would see immediately as a difference because I'm in the legislature. Something else that I think that I could provide that's going to be real experience would be that my career is one in telecommunications. I've worked in that for almost 20 years now, and the telecommunications I've worked in have been specifically repairs within Vermont itself. Everything from email and dial-up back in 2000 to high capacity fiber optic circuits, stretching from Newport, here to Burlington, down to Rutland, all across the state. And as we all know, broadband is a critical part of our state's future needs. And I think I can bring a solid voice to that going forward.
Well, why don't we segue to the next question then, which is your priorities for the next biennium? Because I think you've spoken about some of them, but why don't you use the next couple minutes to continue what you were saying?
Sure, thank you. So absolutely broadband. I can continue with that for a little bit. The experience that I've noticed with broadband that's sort of come up perpetually around the state in the past has been that there have been lots of plans that come forward that quite simply don't have realistic goals in mind, or they don't have realistic price tags attached to them. Someone who's intimately knowledgeable of the state's telecommunications infrastructure, like I am, would be able to look at a plan like even the one presented earlier this year before large parts of it were axed as part of the COVID relief, and tell you that it's off in orders of magnitudes of hundreds of millions of dollars. That's something that I think has been missing for a long time in the legislature, is someone who has that background knowledge. I think I can provide that. Continuing for priorities for the upcoming biennium, something that's
30
incredibly
seconds.
important to me would be passage of the family leave plan. I think with a pickup of a few seats, that becomes a reality. And I think it's patently ridiculous that the United States is lumped in with countries like Suriname and Papua New Guinea as being the only people whose employers are not required to provide paid family leave.
Thank you so much. I'm sure there's more that you can say.
Probably. When it comes to tech, I could go on for a long time.
Karen Dolan, what are your priorities for the next biennium, if you don't mind being specific?
Yes. So I think first, and probably known, this needs to be on the table, is COVID-19 relief and recovery. At every decision that we make, we need to ensure that public safety is right there at the top. And then with that, we need to make sure that we're making investments in our basic needs and our safety net. We need to be constantly asking the question, does everybody have adequate and affordable access to all of their basic needs? And with that, for me, is a strong belief in strengthening our childcare system. Childcare is really an essential part of Vermont's safety net. We knew this before COVID, and it certainly was magnified for many of us with kids once COVID hit. And when families have access to quality and affordable childcare, our communities really thrive. More folks can maintain employment, the workforce grows for employers, and children benefit from the dedicated space to learn and grow. So supporting a system that works for all parties is really critical in our recovery efforts. Another area is racial justice actions. This is another area that the cracks have been magnified with our current pandemic, showing the inequities in our systems. And so now is the time to rebuild smarter, take this knowledge that we've gained and go forward to make real change. And at the same time, and as you said, I'm going into this role knowing that there are many priorities, and my goal is to listen. I have certain things that I have set out as these are things that are a priority, and I really want to listen. I want to try to accomplish as many positive changes that we can for our community of elected.
So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is about the budget. I think there are many legislators and candidates for the legislature who are very well-meaning in their intentions for social change and improvement, but the budget picture is pretty bleak in the next year, 2020 and 21. So I wonder what's your approach to generating the revenue or making the cuts so that some of your priorities could happen?
Would you like me to continue
Yes,
with that?
I'm sorry.
Oh,
yes, Karen.
Okay, great. I just didn't want to get going if it wasn't my turn yet.
Sure.
So yeah, I think that is the question. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and how are we going to make it happen? And so I have some ideas, and at the end of the day, I feel like a real skill that I'm going to bring into this is my experience with navigating difficult conversations in coalition building and collaborating with others, because compromise is going to be the name of the game as we work together to figure these things out. So for me, revenue shortfalls should be addressed with a multi-pronged approach that involves prioritized spending. What is essential? What do we need to focus on? Also, what are new revenue exploration ideas? How can we be thinking creatively about bringing more funding in? And the response must also involve significant community input, because things are going to be changing and going. We can't go into it thinking this is the plan, we have to stick with it. We have to always be assessing what are the needs. So again, we need to be focusing on the essential sectors such as healthcare, education, childcare, general utilities. These are the things that need to be prioritized as we move forward with the budget, along with our small business community, because they are the backbone of so many of these initiatives across the state. For cost savings, that's one of the things that we realized with COVID-19, our current situation. There are some new ways we can do things. Maybe we don't need to incarcerate all the folks that we have that are incarcerated. Maybe we can shift our policing strategies. We can do things online. We need to continue to go down that road of exploring ways to have cost savings. And we also need to be looking at new revenue sources, such as the regulated cannabis market. That's something we could be exploring. Is there a way to introduce an incremental progressive tax shift to help recover some of those losses? And even with all these strategies, federal stimulus is going to be key for this. So I'll be a strong advocate to making sure that Vermont gets as much federal stimulus as possible.
Thank you so much, Karen Dolan. Pat Murray, what's your approach to the budget and the unprecedented revenue and expense challenges that Vermont faces?
Well, I think we all know it's pretty grim. At a municipal level, it's certainly something that keeps me awake at night. We're already looking at tax abatements that we're worried about. It's not even time for taxes to become due. It's not until September. So looking larger at a state level, I think we need to focus on what works for us and what works for Vermont. We know that we're looking at a fall where our tourism, the backbone of our economy, is going to be almost non-existent. The Canadian border is going to remain shut most likely to the end of the year. That's another huge loss of revenue dollars. But where I think we have success and have always had success as a state is in growing the small businesses that we do have. This is the Darn Tufts. This is the Alchemy Brewery. It's the Ben & Jerry's. It's the Blodgett's of the world, of Vermont. And these businesses were doing extremely well before COVID. They were doing so well, in fact, that Blodgett is here in Essex, and when I go up there and talk to the managers, they have 20 positions open that they can hire. They're paying $20 to $25 an hour. But they don't have the people to fill those positions. So I think for me, focus on our economy and the recovery is going to be focused on making sure that those small businesses have the chance to survive this and to grow past the crisis. That's where I want to see our focus when we come up to the budget for next year. We need to triage. Obviously, we need to keep food on the table. We need to make sure that people stay in their houses and they're not being impacted by the inability to pay rent. Those social programs are critical. But I think that growing the economy and getting past this crisis, we're going to see that by helping our small businesses become a success.
Thank you so much. Why don't we go to the next question, which I think is something that you have some expertise in, given your background on school boards. Given the decline in the student population in most parts of Vermont, how can the state continue to deliver high quality education and still pay its faculty and take care of the people that teach our children? Pat Murray.
Yeah. So for me, the way that I've seen this, and something that I think is difficult for us to sometimes approach, because in this day and age, we want answers right away. We want the results right away. But the merging of school districts, and I'm going to use Essex as a prime example for that because we are in year 5 now of that process. Essex Westford School District merged and brought together multiple districts, and we're in year, as I mentioned, multiple years into that process. And in 2000, apologies, the notes, in 2016-17, our tax rate was 1.57, and this year was 1.486. We managed to bring the tax rate down a significant amount because of the merger. We found those successes, the repeats, whether they be administrative costs, superintendents that we didn't need 2 of, financial departments that we were able to streamline. We were among the first to do it. And I don't think that Vermont has given enough time to the various districts that are out there to let this program work, and see that it can actually achieve positive results. Essex High School is a top 50 in the country, competing with private high schools, which is saying something in STEM programs. It is a destination high school to send your kids to if you want to learn. And we're able to do that while continuing to lower the tax rate for those who live in our community. I think that's a perfect example of how the mergers can work and can save costs over time. And I think we need to give it a chance to work.
Thank you so much. Karen Dolan, what's your view on the education funding crisis, I imagine you could safely call it, and how do we continue to deliver high quality education to our students?
Yeah, and so I think there are a variety of different ways that you could take this, and one that I'm landing on is making sure that Vermont is a state that attracts families. This will not only further reinforce our commitment to high quality education, but also strengthen the base for enrollment and for funding. So looking at ways that we can attract more families to our state. And I think this is true for our community as well. We want families here. We want to see that growth. So continuing our efforts on COVID-19 recovery. We need to be a safe place for folks that want to come to. We need to have livable wages, paid family leave, strengthen our childcare system, broadband, and promote in-state post-secondary education opportunities. So with those, we can attract new families to come, have their children go to our school systems, and we can also ensure folks that are graduating from our schools have opportunities to stay here and continue to live here. So we really need to take these bold steps of investing in our most critical services in order to lift each other up now and create a solid path for our future ahead.
I'm going to move on to the equity question, and Karen, you'll be answering this, and the next question will be one that you can ask each other. Do you think that Vermont's legislature is doing enough to dismantle systemic racism in Vermont? Karen.
So really appreciative of the work that has been done, and at the same time, much more is needed. And I think most folks will agree with that too, especially under our current situation. Racial justice and equity need to be a constant priority and topic of conversation in all of our decisions. I think that's what we're seeing. We're kind of waking up to the idea, yes, things need to change, things need to be different, and we need to ensure that there are diverse voices at the table when we're making decisions and better understand the impacts that our policies have on folks that are marginalized in our communities. And we need to really remain open to the idea that we need to change things. We need to change the way things have been done in the past in order to create real change in the future. So it's just not making little tweaks here or there. It's we're looking at some bold changes that need to be made. And so how I would do that, because again, I can't say I am the expert in what those changes are. And so I would really look to bring folks together to have conversations. We have a lot of wonderful organizations in Vermont that are doing this work and are experts in racial justice and equity work. And so I'd want to bring those folks to the table and share what are their recommendations, what are their ideas. So it would be a lot of listening and then action. I would use my experience with restorative practice to really help navigate those difficult conversations, because it's not going to be easy. These are hard conversations to have. And I feel really fortunate that I've had the experience with restorative justice, but also I've been a part of VIEW in our community, which stands for Voices for Inclusion in Essex and Westford. And I've had the ability to co-facilitate this group, which is a variety of community members that are volunteering their time from all ages, all parts of the community, to bring new ideas to raising awareness around equity and inclusion in our community. And that's the same experience and skill set that I would bring to the State House.
Thank you very much, Karen Dolan. Pat Murray, your view on the Vermont's legislature's role in dismantling systemic racism.
Yeah. I mean, to be frank, when I first saw this question, I had to research to find out what exactly qualified as racial equity legislation that the Vermont legislature has tackled. I think it's been pretty sparse over the last few years. There's been a racial equity advisory. There's been a director of racial equity position that was established after a recent veto. But if you go to the legislature's page, that advisory council's website is one paragraph long. They delivered a report to the legislature for 2020 this year that was a grand total of 2 pages. One of them was the cover page. I mean, that doesn't say to me that this work was being taken seriously until the last 2 months or so, when the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor pushed this country to a breaking point. So I know that there is excellent racial justice work that is happening around the state, and some of it is happening in the legislature. But if someone like myself, who is keyed pretty closely into things like education, I know that the education committee does do work around racial justice, but why is that not included in a racial equity advisory group's report? There's been work around the prisoner population. Why is that not included in a racial equity report given to the legislature in 2020? I think that what happened is that this wasn't a big enough priority. It was just something that people have been checking a box in for so long, and we were honestly this year on our way to just checking another box to 2021 until the country grappled with what was happening in its current news. So no, I don't think that they're doing enough at all. I think we need to be far more proactive and especially more vocal about the work that's going on in the legislature.
Thank you so much. Do you have a question, Pat, for Karen Dolan?
Karen, I would ask, I guess, maybe one thing that I'd like to know a little more about, when you were talking about the budget and you talked about some multi-pronged approaches and sources of revenue, could you talk a little bit more about what you see those sources or those revenue sources as? Just in a time of COVID, I know that we've sort of struggled to find those. So it's not an easy answer, but I'd like to kind of get an idea specifically what you're referring to.
You have a minute.
Yeah. Okay. So one that I had shared was exploring the regulated cannabis market. I feel like that's something we could explore and see, can that be put in place? Is this the time? Is this the right time? I'm not sure, but that's something that we could see. Also see, is this a time to put in some kind of progressive tax shift? It's not going to be something that everybody's going to be a fan of, but this is the time that we need really bold decisions, because we need to make sure that everybody has adequate access to the essentials. And so we can't say it's okay for everybody to have a lot more. We need to make sure everybody is taken care of.
Thank you.
Those are a couple. I think there's also some cost savings areas too.
Karen, do you have a question for Pat?
Yeah. So I think it's probably pretty clear that coalition building and collaboration is key for me. And so I'm curious what you see as your steps if you're elected to make those coalitions and collaborations happen.
Thank you.
For me, the work that I've done has been about not just the work that I can do in any particular group that I've been a part of, but also within that group, how I can make outreaches to the people within it. In particular, when I'm talking about school board work, though I was on the leadership team there, you mentioned View. I was actually also part of the communications team and part of a group called Voices for Education. It's just something I did outside of school board work, but it was a group that was focused on racial equity and diversity within the school systems itself, and actually was a precursor to the View group. Was a part of sort of bringing that to a recommendation to the further community. So I think that coalition building is something that I do not just in a group that I'm in, but once I get within it, it's finding the voices within it and connecting with them.
Well, I want to thank both of you for joining us. We have covered a lot of ground, so we don't have time for closing statements, but I think that your answers have really spoken for themselves. We've been speaking with two of the three candidates in the Democratic primary for Chittenden 8-2 state representative for the House of Representatives of Vermont, and that is mostly all of Essex Junction. Karen Dolan, thank you very much. Patrick Murray, and Lori Houghton, who is the incumbent, was not able to join us, but hopefully we will be able to tack on some of her responses. So thank you so much, and thank you for watching Town Meeting Television's continuing coverage of primary and general elections 2020 in Vermont. Stay tuned.